we have Rick Fenuccio and John Bologna. We're so excited to have these two. Rick is a registered architect and president of Brown, Lindquist, Fenuccio, and Raber Architects. And John Bologna is CEO of, my paper is together here, CEO and president of Coastal Engineering. And we're so lucky to have them because they're both longtime Cape residents and people who have worked in affordable housing for many, many years here on the Cape. And today we're hoping to explore the range of housing types, zoning options to meet community needs, and food for thought in selecting a site for development. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rick and John and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to try this without a mic. Hopefully we can project. If you need me to grab the mic, I'll be happy to use it. So I've been on the Cape since 1984. I've been an architect here for those 34 years, and in that time I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of projects, many, many different types of housing projects, from everything from single-family homes that we all have, multi-unit homes, senior housing, special needs housing. I have to say it's a little intimidating presenting in front of Mr. Presbury, seeing as though he was a long-time client, and he'll be seeing some of the projects he was involved in today. And we've worked with John at Coastal for well over 25 years, so we've kind of been in the trenches for a long, long time. And not that we're zoning experts by any means, but we certainly have been evaluating and reviewing and working within the context of zoning bylaws for our entire career. So I think we have a pretty good working knowledge of things that work, things that don't work, and we're hoping today to kind of spark a lot of conversation about housing types, what we're doing, what we're not doing, how does zoning plug into that. And then just a real quick little anecdote. I grew up in Holden outside Worcester, small little town, great town. I was a kid of the 60s and 70s, and I got an interest in architecture when I was very young, probably 9, 10 years old. And I loved our town center. And it wasn't this glamorous kind of Lexington or Concord type of center, but it was a great town to grow up in. And I started thinking about it as we were preparing for this session. It had the quintessential mix of a downtown that had retail and churches and schools and housing and a wide range of open space and parks all coexisting to create a sense of place. And I really feel part of why this topic is really important to me personally, and somebody who's been in housing, I think it's the most important thing we do as architects on the Cape is work on housing. For me, I look at placemaking, I look at sense of place, and I feel like we've veered away from that. And I think in the last 50 years, zoning has been one of the biggest culprits of that. And for all its intended benefits, zoning has taken us down paths and unintended consequences of things we didn't really want. And we've inherited developments that we don't like. And it's in the paper today, we'll touch on Falmouth and what they're dealing with on Main Street in Falmouth. So I think it's such an important topic that when Laura and I first started talking about the topic, I said I'd be happy to do a session on it and contribute whatever I can. Because I really think on the Cape, it's the most important topic we can deal with. We know job creation, we know retaining youth, we know environmental protections, and all of those things are all baked into it and all considered. But we're going to concentrate obviously today on housing and zoning and sites and site selection and housing types. And then we're going to hopefully spark some conversation about what you all as community folks, community leaders, people who are on boards, what you're going to be dealing with at your town level and where can we help you. So, John, introduction.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity for being here. And I'm John Bologna, Coastal Engineering. As Laura indicated, I've been here for over 30 years personally. Coastal Engineering has been in business for over 40 years. Been practicing on the Cape primarily. We have an office in Orleans where our main office is, an office in Sandwich and one in Nantucket. The old commercial for the Hair Club for America. I'm not only president, but I also live here. So, I remember. Somewhere along the lines, the analogy. So, living on Cape, I think, we're in the trenches, as Rick said, with working with both public and private entities on the development end of things. Our role really is to find the balance between development needs and environmental and other regulatory. So a lot of what we do is working with the regulatory agencies of, when a client comes to us, whether it's private or municipality or an institution for that matter, first thing they want to know is, this is what we want to do, how can we get there, and can we do it? And so we get involved in a lot of feasibility assessments, looking at either new sites or existing sites, and to make these evaluations on what can be done from the development side of things. So we're not getting into the too technical part, but we'll be touching a little bit about that. But I think really speaking to the heart of what Rick had touched upon, I think all of us can look back at Anytown, USA, and what that was, what that means to us. When you say the word home, what does it mean? It conjures up images of Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life, and what small town USA used to look like. And a lot of what we see is looking back and then looking forward, and keeping the history in perspective to where we want to go. And I found it extremely ironic. I have a brother who lives in Texas, in Dallas, and there's a little community called Grapevine, which is just to the northwest of Dallas. It's a sprawling community, and it's developed back in the late 19th century. And it's got a pretty distinct historic district, and they're kind of looking at the same type of things, and then trying to protect their historic Main Street area. But right outside the city, the town center, a new development was built, and it's exactly what you were just talking about, sort of a back to the future type of thing, It's a subdivision. It was I found it so ironic because I went to the subdivision, the development, and there's mixed-use retail and residential apartments and so forth. And the streets were called Blueberry Street, Nantucket Avenue, and so they're looking to New England, for a sense of place and what does community mean. So I think tying all those things, I just threw a quote out here from Winston Churchill. He says, we shape our dwellings, and afterwards our dwellings shape us. So, one of the things I will be touching upon as we go through the presentation is, with zoning, with regulations and so forth, is, looking at the good intentions, and they're all started off with good intentions, but also the unintended consequences that come with that. And we'll talk about, some of the zoning regulations that were put back in the 80s, maybe to curtail overdevelopment, but as a result of, like, two-acre subdivisions, for instance, created a push in development of larger areas, which kind of throttled back or stifled potential development or redevelopment within the village centers. And then this is something we'll touch upon again.
One last thing before we jump into kind of the quick agenda for today. This session is definitely going to focus more on town-centered areas. So fear not, we're not talking about housing and outlying environmentally sensitive areas and estuaries and so forth. We're concentrating today's topic really on those areas that are either previously disturbed, previously developed, town-centered areas, areas where compactness and density and infrastructure are all available to us. So I think, to try to localize the topic, we had to keep a certain focus on this. So as you see these slides and we get into a discussion, we're definitely talking more about all of the kind of call it town-centered areas that we have in each of our towns to some degree. Some significantly defined areas, some have less defined kind of town centers. But the principles, I think, generally are transferable. So we're going to go through what is zoning at the most highest level. Just start with some basic vocabulary and definitions about what is zoning, what is its purpose. We're going to move into some visioning. What do you want to see in your town? The theme that we're going to build on today is you're the master of your own destiny. We're not here as local professionals to tell you what to do in your town. You're the policymakers, you're the board members, you're the political leaders. It's really, you're on the ground level of all this. We're going to talk about housing types, what we all know, but what are the housing types that are quickly coming upon us based on shifting demographics. We're going to talk about different types of zoning options just briefly to, again, build some vocabulary. We're going to look at site selection, infrastructure, and the importance of feasibility studies, especially if it's a town-led initiative. If a town identifies a parcel, what are the most important things that a town or a public agency or housing authority needs to think about when determining feasibility of a site? John and I will toggle on the criteria that really should be considered when you're evaluating a site. And we're going to do a real-world case study. We're going to look at a site in a village-centered area. We're going to kind of throw caution to the wind and look at it as if it was a clean slate. What could it be? And then we'll certainly want to time, there'll be opportunities to kind of weave in and out of here with some exercises. So real quick, what is zoning? This is just two quick quotes that I thought as we were preparing that was interesting. Zoning is the real power behind the planning, and it is zoning that gives teeth to planning ideals and objectives. Planning as such cannot require that land be used in a particular manner, but zoning can. So this is a way of distinguishing the terminology, planning versus zoning. And then conventional zoning was not created to address urban design and quality of place issues that are increasingly seen as essential to the creation of inviting, healthy, and vibrant communities. Purpose of zoning. We might think we have a basic working knowledge, but we thought it would, again, starting with the basics and what is zoning intended to be. This is not my terminology. This is out of multiple sources of what zoning is intended to do. Obviously, promote and protect public health, safety, and welfare. Protect the character of residential, commercial, industrial, recreational, and agricultural areas, all existing simultaneously. And promoting the beneficial development of such areas. Provide adequate light, air, privacy, and convenience of access. Regulate the intensity of uses and lot areas in determining the area of open spaces. Reduce congestion on highways and streets to protect one another from fire, odors, smoke, noise, and other nuisances for appropriate uses, adjacent to appropriate uses, and conserve the taxable value of land and buildings. That's just a quick overview of what. So again, we start with the overarching theme today, control your own destiny or someone else will. So if we don't do it at the ground level and at the policy level and at the zoning level, then we can't complain when developers come in and enforce projects down our throat. 300, 400 units, whatever it might be. We're going to touch again on probably one of the most timely things that is happening right on Main Street in Falmouth too. So this is really just to kind of create that sense of urgency that if we don't do it, we're leaving it up to others. Who controls and impacts zoning regulations? So we thought it might be good to just kind of start with, of course, residents at the core level. It all boils down to what do town residents approve via town meeting, through town council action, and then who works for the residents? Of course, it's planning boards and planning departments, zoning boards and zoning departments. We have boards of selectmen and elected town council members. So these are the core people that we see are the ones that inform the zoning, but then of course there's all these others around the perimeter that at some level inform zoning, right? The state's going to tell you whether what you propose as a zoning amendment is legal. They're going to put the legal standard to it. Did you create something too onerous? They're going to tell you about it. You're going to hear about it at the Attorney General level. So certainly the state regs and Mass General laws inform zoning. Local DPW, water sewer commissions, economic development organizations, historic commissions, open space land trusts, conservation committees, health departments, all of these things factor into and have a role in crafting and obviously enforcing zoning. So this is just a way of kind of. So I want to start though with not dry zoning topics. I wanted to start with something on a visioning. So I want you to just kind of look at the image on the right. Obviously, it's a conceptual image from anywhere in USA. It's a nice street-lined street. It's parking on the street. It's sidewalks. It's homes close to the edge, compactness. Some of us probably grew up in a neighborhood like this. Well, obviously, in the Cape, these neighborhoods are far and few between. So we're going to pose two questions to you, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to just jot down some thoughts. I'm going to take a pause right out of the gate. Where did you grow up? What town did your city, town or city did you grow up in? And what were the positive and negative qualities of your city or town? And I think positive and negative. We want to understand where you're coming from and what are the things that you see eventually the Cape is going to need and needs now. So just going to take a few minutes of a pause. Where did you grow up? Just jot a quick note into the margins. We're going to come back in it, about a handful of slides. I'm just going to take two minutes here and take a break. feel free to keep writing. I'm just going to start moving along because we do have a lot to cover. So I'm going to run through some images now. I'm going to move through them relatively quickly. And again, it's just to kind of plant seeds, visual seeds of things that we have both on and off Cape that might inform the conversation about zoning, density, compactness, housing, all of these things kind of woven together. The one nice thing about New England is we have lots of village centers to draw from. We have some right in our own backyard. I mean, we've got wonderful downtowns that a lot of people come to see far and wide, right? They come to Chatham. They want to walk Main Street, Chatham, and Gould Park. Everyone certainly uses Nantucket as a kind of a standard, but of course it's somewhat downtown, frozen in time. The interesting thing about Nantucket is it's got a lot of compactness because, we'll get into the history of Nantucket, you probably all know it. It's a snapshot in time and it was preserved. So we got lucky with Nantucket being preserved while the whaling industry obviously left. Falmouth, I think there's some wonderful characteristics to Main Street Falmouth. Again, interesting mixes of open spaces, civic and public uses with housing woven in. It's not a very long stretch of street, but it does have some really interesting qualities to it. I threw Amherst in here more just because it kind of spoke to the kind of typical New England town organized around the town green. And in this case, you kind of have Amherst College clipped on the corner. But, you know, you've got everything mixed in here. Offices, retail, you've got a small hotel, you've got restaurants, you've got housing over shops, offices over shops. You've got a really vibrant downtown in Amherst. Now, you might contend that that is because it's a college town, but I'm doing work with an architect out there right now, so I'm out there frequently. And there's times when there's not students in the area, it's just plain people who live and work in Amherst or at that downtown area. It's a vibrant area. So some of these images, whoops. So I'm going to ask the kind of rhetorical question, what appeals to us? I'm hoping most people would agree that the things I'm going to show you are appealing, and that they're things that unfortunately most of our zoning bylaws don't allow. Right? So we might like it, but we can't have it based on what we currently have as zoning and the way it's written, and mostly the way it's presented to us as planners, as engineers, architects, developers, housing authorities, whatever we're trying to do. We generally can't get this. You know, buildings this close to the street, define walkable street edges, pedestrian skilled buildings, mixed and compatible uses, vibrant and active town centers. Now, you probably recognize this as Mashpee Commons. It's referred to a lot in these kinds of sessions. It's obviously a crafted town. My contention is that it's almost not big enough. It doesn't have critical mass yet. And they don't have a vibrant housing component yet. They're starting down that path, and it's good to see it. And then maybe it'll take it from being a bit of a crafted retail center to a vibrant real town center. Mashpee didn't really have a town center, so the developers of Mashpee Commons said, we're going to use kind of new urbanist principles, and we're going to define a town, and we're going to mix uses throughout. Compact forms and density balanced with open spaces. Vibrant and contextual architecture, open space and landscaping elements, and a mix of old and new. This is actually a drawing from the 80s from the original Mashpee Commons development. So this phase obviously hasn't been built, and maybe it will never be built, but I found it in a book from around 1986 that I had, and I thought it was an interesting topic because they clearly are showing an intention of whether these are apartments or a school or an office building mixed with housing or with a shop, with a church and a village green and a public sitting space and landscaping elements that define edges. So again, this was their intent, but you can take out of this, can't this be any downtown, or couldn't this be where we are now? A couple of shots of the Main Street Falmouth, clear pedestrian and vehicular circulation. Pedestrian streets. Some of these are going to start obviously veering off Cape, but I think it's the principle we're trying to convey is, do we want pedestrian level streets where sometimes traffic's not allowed, but buildings are brought close together, and we're trying to create intentional spaces. Again, not allowed under most zoning bylaws in most of these towns. Walkable downtowns. Obviously, there's a big demographic shift back towards desire for walkable downtowns, living, working, and recreating in downtown areas. You can probably see it with many of our kids. A lot of them aren't coming back here for a litany of reasons, but one of them is they're all kind of flocking to an urban model. So walkable downtowns, I think, is something that we all enjoy around here in our towns. Consistent street edge. This is up in Newburyport. Scale of buildings, maybe a bit bigger than what we're used to seeing here in terms of 3 and 4 and 5-story buildings. But the point of this slide is just that, again, coexisting retail with a mix of housing and more dense urban forms around it. So whether these are apartments or offices or a mix, it's all about creating a vibrant and an interesting downtown setting and not segregating the uses to the degree zoning usually segregates. Pedestrian spaces along street edges. There's towns that are kind of really trying to develop that model where you're pulling restaurants and seating out on the street edges, activating street side and nightlife along the street side here. But again, even just kind of look up and look at how consistent the buildings are across and the kind of the repetitiveness of the architecture. So I think you go to these towns and there's something very appealing about them. And of course, we have some gems in our own backyard. We have compactness and density, but with a pedestrian scale. Commercial Street, Provincetown, right? We have buildings right up against the street, right? People still find their way along the sidewalk. Traffic somehow slowly meanders down the virtual street. But the idea here again is we've got a mix of uses over retail and other kind of public spaces on the ground level. So it's about mix and compatibility. Just another shot that shows a rich variety of architectural styles and a mix of residential within civic and commercial uses. So again, just reinforcing compatibility of uses. They can coexist. We got to just be thoughtful about how we're doing it, how we're crafting bylaws to incentivize and allow these kinds of things to happen. This is another shot of downtown Amherst, and I just liked it because it was, again, it just reinforced that kind of commercial level with a mix. And these are tall buildings, but you can see they're only 3 stories really from here to here. So they've got offices up here. There's probably some apartments being entered in. My friend who's the architect, his office is actually right in there. A variety of uses and building scale while retaining local character. This is Rockport. So you got a performing arts center right on the main street. And then look at the size of the structures next to it. But you can look at how it creates this kind of uniform streetscape. And again, buildings right up. You know this is 0 lot line in the bylaw. Well, they were built clearly before bylaws, so there was 0 lot line. Their buildings were brought to the front. I'm gathering there's parking and other delivery areas tucked in back. A couple other just images of Falmouth, just to kind of reinforce that we have some of these traditions already and patterns already here. We've got buildings close together. We've got buildings close to the street. We have some instances where we've got housing over the shop. We just don't have enough of it. Just another shot of Falmouth. And of course, we all like our nice street signs and street lighting and kind of pedestrian elements. So this is obviously not just about buildings and structures, but it's about open space, and it gets right down to how we handle the details of our villages. How do we handle signage and lighting? So it's important to even think about this at that kind of granular level, even though we're talking today kind of at the broader, higher level about zoning and sites. I love this image, and I thought this could be anywhere in USA with a waterfront, whether it's a lake or an ocean, but it just spoke to me as this is the kind of stuff I repeatedly hear over the years I've been here. Why don't we have this in blank location, fill in the blank?
It's like Annapolis.
Yeah, yeah. And these are not massive buildings. I mean, they're a 3-story building. There's a 4-story here. Again, a very dynamic kind of street level commercial plate with clearly the reference to housing above it. Right? Daytime, nighttime uses all commingled along the waterfront. So what appeals to us real quickly? Vibrant and active walkable town centers, compact forms, density balanced with open spaces, defined and walkable street edge with a pedestrian scale, mixed compatible uses, defining public and private spaces, vibrant architecture and landscaping elements, compatibility between the old and the new. We love our history, we love our old buildings. There's no reason, and we're certainly not advocating, that this become a clean slate approach. We need to weave in the old and the new. clear pedestrian and vehicular circulation, nice signage and lighting, and here's where we're back to where we started in this section. Where did you grow up? What were the positive and negative qualities of your city or town? What would you like in your Cape Cod community? So, Laura, I don't know if you want to be the scribe or,
Yes.
but we wanted to pause there before John jumps into something here and just open that question up to anybody who
Does
wants
anyone
to.
want to weigh in on that
No.
question?
Where did you grow up and what did you like and what didn't you like?
Susan?
Watertown, Massachusetts,
Okay.
sidewalks everywhere, ample public transportation, parks and recreation within walking distance of neighborhoods, stores and services, walking.
Thank you. Mary.
So I grew up in Brockton, and the first two that Susan said, those were the two that I missed when I went to a more rural area with the public transportation and the sidewalks.
Yeah.
I was born in the town of Ware, and Ware in the middle of the state is the town after Lake. There's a tremendous community spirit. My brothers who were in the local drum corps who paraded on Main Street. It was the hit of the community every year. And in my community, in the small town of Warren, next door to Ware, it was a small town. It was 2 blocks long. Everyone knew everyone, and the traffic light defined the center of town.
Sure. I have family in Brookfield, so I know where, and Brookfield's one of those downtowns, a beautiful green space
Beautiful.
with terrific homes that kind of circle around the downtown village green.
Classic.
I actually grew up in Jimmy Stewart's hometown,
Literally.
literally. His sister was my mother's Girl Scout leader. It was Indiana, Pennsylvania. And I think the good things at that time, growing up in the 50s and 60s, were that it was wonderful for walking, biking, driving, you name it. It was easy to get around town. It was very safe, and it was a college town, is a college town. The downtown area subsequently has become practically dead because of the advent of shopping malls and people wanting to move out of the downtown area into more suburban areas.
Thank you.
I grew up in Framingham, which I think is different than what a lot of people have talked about. In our 60s development, the sprawling at the time, but mostly because of the transportation, was because they had 2 exits off the Mass Pike that drove the road.
Sure.
So it was nice because everybody had a nice backyard and things like that. And it did have, both as a positive and a negative, it had the shop. It did have, the Shoppers World was a big deal, and they had mall-in and all that stuff. So you could get to those kinds of things. But it in the downtown Framingham at the time was on the decline, big time. Now it's made some comeback over the years, mainly due to the Brazilian community in there. But it was not where you would want to necessarily, you went there because they sold cheap sneakers in one of the stores, and we had 6 kids, right? And so you went and did that kind of stuff. And the other comment is, what I've found, I love it down here, but as I've gotten older, I've moved more into the cities. I spent the last 3 years of my work career right in New York City, and I miss the activity and the action.
I grew up in Woods Hole, which, as we all know, has a challenge of itself, being constructed and built around a specific community. And it was in the 70s, and as the years have progressed, I think it's, as we all know, probably faces different challenges than anywhere else that I find fascinating and always wonder how many other communities that are like that are there. Both the good and the bad, as we know, there's one road in, one road out. No one knows about the back road. And that has, I think, specific challenges of its own.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I have a little bit on what I grew up in Seacon, which is a community that doesn't have any particular identity to probably anybody that's from it. Some of it is quite commercial. I grew up in a rural part of Seacon, and so it was, a grazing land, a lot of it that had been converted to lots, and so that they had a neighborhood with several So a lot of my time, the good news is, I give you the bad news. The good news was that Mike Rose's term was a mile and a half away, so there was a lot of biking involved. There wasn't much traffic. There were endless woods, and I spent the first 12 years of my life wandering in the woods, just kind of alone, feeling alone, but also seeing the world from a very different point of view than what we've been talking about here. And so my feeling, just to draw a quick conclusion, is that you have to have some of both to have things be perfect. You know, you have to have some rural areas that are accessible and some open spaces,
Not balanced.
some alone time and some quiet.
Right.
But then, you know, I did long for, you know, a field where a bunch of kids are playing baseball, for example. I never had that.
Right.
So,
I grew up in Yarmouth, Massachusetts.
Right down the way,
Yeah, and was originally in South Yarmouth, and you know, one thing was, there was, probably still is, no real center of town. When I was growing up, I can actually remember, I was old enough when they actually built the first Angel Rose, which is now where I guess it's the Shaw's Market. Now, that was effectively the town center, the strip shopping center, and you know, you go there and before Halloween, they let the kids decorate the windows and things like that. You know, good things about going up in Cape Cod that long ago was, you know, so where people would go away and hang out with their friends, would go down along the estates along Bass River, everybody's gone, and you know, looking around the house, not hurting anything like that. But you know, there was a lot of stuff like that. But the center was at the time was Hyannis, and it was very different those days before the Cape Cod Mall. And of course, it kind of went into a long decline. In some ways, it was coming back. It was not down there, but ways to go. In some ways, it was more vibrant.
Well, it's
It's
interesting.
actually more vibrant now than it was since almost before the cemetery burned down. That was a while ago.
Well, I'm glad we had this because we were hoping to hear the distinction between people that grew up in a more traditional setting, a little more urban setting, a little bit more rural setting, and you extract things out of it and things that you want, right? So what of those things are transferable to today? I think that's what we're trying to reinforce is are there principles that we can reinforce today that we're not trying to make this a saccharine turn back in time. So I don't think it's kind of a back to the future that we're all talking about. We're talking about using basic, good old style town-making principles and utilizing that in housing today. Thank you, sir.
I grew up in Quincy and all those things, true, but one thing I just thought of is that I had to go around neighbors.
Yeah.
And what a difference it is here to not have neighbors around me.
Yeah, it's different. So, thank you very much. I'm sorry, one more.
One thing that nobody mentioned, I grew up in Belmont, Mass,
Belmont?
which is right next to Watertown. But the first thing I wrote was the access to jobs, because from Boston.
Yeah.
So to be a suburb, and you need the jobs
Yeah.
and we can talk about that, but that's a big deal.
I mean, that's a right topic unto itself. I mean, how is housing and job creation and job retention? I mean, we could obviously talk for hours on just that topic, so won't be able to, so we're gonna have to move along here to keep things on track. So John's gonna take now zoning is broken. Maybe it's an understatement.
So, yeah, thank you for the good topic here. You called me to fix up a mess here. You know, with any type of regulation, they're inherent in it. There's irregularities, and it's not complete and perfect. I like the way the preamble of our U.S. Constitution starts out. You know, we the people, in order to create a more perfect union. It's not to create a perfect union. You know, the utopia, we're not going to find that on this side of eternity. But to create a more perfect. So it's achieving or working towards some of those objectives that we've been talking about. I get down to brass tacks, and once a law gets codified, then it's the law of the land. And, you know, every word is important, every comma, every period, every dot. But even still, that's why I got zoning boards of appeals, because there's still squishy spots within even those regulations. So in essence, I mean, the zoning, purpose of the zoning is to kind of direct land use planning by governments, to meet some of the objectives that were spoken about earlier. One of the things that we see on our side of things is we're going through and trying to interpret the projects, and oftentimes you get involved in a project, even a relatively minor project, and you have to have a team of lawyers and architects and engineers and consultants and specialists, and it really starts putting some constraints on what you can do, number one, and then the cost of the development and so forth. And these are the challenges that we find ourselves. So here's kind of an example here is a hypothetical case. This is a lot located anywhere. There's zoning districts, there's overlay districts, there's conservation areas that have to be identified, well protection areas. So just kind of a hypothetical case, there's a lot on a roadway here, those are the boundary lines. There's a setback requirements. So if we were given a raw piece of land and someone came in and said, we want to develop, fill in the blanks, what can we do on this lot? So you have to start taking it, and that raw piece of land starts getting broken down. So first thing you have to look at is what the setbacks are, sideline setbacks, roadside setbacks, and so forth. There may be a natural habitat area, so that's going to take out a chunk of the area. You may have a certain impervious lot coverage that's going to take out a certain chunk of the area. Again, there may be wetlands in here. It's not only the wetlands, there's also a buffer or a boundary to that, and it's 100 feet off of the wetland. What you can do, most towns have 50-foot no disturb zone from off the wetland, so that takes off another chunk of area. You have to segregate if it doesn't have town sewer, a certain amount of area for your sewage disposal system. You might have some parking area designated in here, and parking demands will be created based on the occupancy and use of the building. So from all those pieces there, you can see just from this size lot, which looks pretty good proportionately, but you end up with a smaller building footprint, and all those various demands end up driving what can potentially be developed on it. So what we see sometimes is a lot of times there's very few as-of-right sites, and Rick will touch upon some examples of that. Meaning when you go in your zoning table, what can you do? There's very few of them which are just as-of-right to developments. Oftentimes the zoning regulations are complex, they're contradictory, they're out of date. Sometimes we run into spot zoning. And again, Rick will have an example of what we mean by that. I'm sure you're familiar with the term. Sometimes it's restrictive, it's not creative and proactive, and it may sometimes not even incentivize some of the things that you're trying to accomplish with affordable housing, for instance. And one of the things that we'll talk about later on is what we do to be more proactive in that area, how we identify certain areas that maybe want to be able to do that, and kind of go into this town center thing that we were talking about earlier. Maybe there is looking at it. And I know a lot of communities have already looked at that. There's certain towns have already adopted growth incentive zones. Town of Harwich is looking at East Harwich, for instance, as being an area where there's potential development for this type of community as well. And we talk about it, kind of law of unintended consequences. If you look at kind of this 2-acre zoning, as I brought it up before, that was intended again to limit the amount of development. But what it did is it did kind of push everything else. So the urban sprawl, that everybody hates to see, is really a result of this type of thing. When you start mandating larger lots, so you end up spreading it. So, and towns have kind of reacted to that by allowing cluster subdivisions and so forth. So it's kind of creating a law, and they see what doesn't work, so they make a patch to it. And then what you end up with at the end is a whole quilt-work of various rules and regulations. And to going through the rules sometimes, you got to be Philadelphia lawyers trying to understand, where the rules are, what you can do and what you can't do in a particular zone. And so anyways, and that's all these things take time and cost money, even before you can just stick a shovel in the ground, just to figure out what you can do. So, those things do drive up your development costs, whether you're a private entity, a public entity, or a private partner agreement or an institution. Everyone's got to do the same thing.
I just wanted, before you move on, I live in Barnstable, and I'm really proud of this stat. 36 zoning districts in my town, 13 overlays. It's like if we're in our town, I guess if we're not sure what to do with a particular lot, we just create a new zone. So, and I've had conversations with acquaintances in the planning office, and they're struggling like all towns to get a hold of how do they create and utilize. We've had comprehensive plans like this in our town, and somehow over the last 20, 25 years, they don't seem to have boiled down to effective change in the bylaw. So we've got lots of plans in Barnstable, but somehow they're not percolating down to real effective zoning change. So we've got this de facto spot zoning going on. It almost creates, the bottom point, yields site-specific solutions, not integrated communities and streetscapes. And that's just, that's a byproduct of spot zoning, is to kind of zero in on that as a site unto itself and not part of the bigger fabric of the town. And one other bullet that I did want to point out is multi-unit housing, which is, you see, we haven't intentionally talked about multi-unit housing. This is housing in the broader topic today. Of course, we're talking about, at some level, affordable housing, market rate housing, single families, multi-unit. We're talking about the broad topic of housing, not just affordable or multi-unit today. But the bylaws either don't address it, they prohibit it, or it's only allowed by special permit. So when we do get to those types of uses, and we are trying to develop a mix of affordable and market rate housing, a lot of the bylaws don't address it, or they immediately throw us into the special permit bucket, and that's when the 40B world kicks in. I'm going to touch base on that next. So, John, you're going to cover as a
Well, just to spring off of that, so this is an idealized community to spring off of what Rick had just said. As of right, essentially development may proceed without the need for special permit, a variance, or any sort of amendments. So, in this particular case, there's clearly defined village center area that would have some of these kind of provisions to allow for that mixed use. Residential in the outer areas. Again, this is any town USA to show, as a layout with a zoning district, which allows for whatever the developments are within those very zoning districts. As of right, zoning is very specific. The same rules apply to everyone. It ensures consistent, rational application, and sort of discourages some of the back deal making. Sometimes you have to do some swapping back and forth. But it really kind of speaks to what we've been talking about, again, for kind of eliminating as many of the unknowns as possible and to clear the playing field, if you will, from a pre-development point of view. One of the things that Rick and I talked about was, from our perspective, is sort of objective-based or goal-based regulations when you talk about some town planning and so forth. So, and I know there's been a lot of talk about that on the commission level, various planning boards, look at these sort of things. But in a sense, they're hamstrung because we've got sort of this whole mass of regulations that are already in place. And we're not advocating to just throw them all out and starting all from scratch, but as you're going forward, folks in this audience have some influence on these kind of decisions as they look at it. And we're hoping that maybe we can inform you, just from our perspective, being in the trenches, what experiences that we have as a way of moving the agenda forward.
John and I did a study on this particular site last December. It's 850 Falmouth Road in Hyannis, and to me it's the epitome of spot zoning. It's a zoning district in itself. It's one site. And I gotta just read the bylaw. This is just one of those you can't make up. The total number of residential units allowed within a multifamily affordable housing development shall not exceed 8 per acre of upland, provided, however, that within the redevelopment of an existing structure previously used as a nursing home or convalescent home, which is 100% affordable, the total number of residential units allowed shall not exceed 16 per acre of upland. Okay, what does all that boil down to? That means this decrepit nursing home, which has been abandoned for a long time and should have been torn down years ago, somehow you can put 47.7 or 48 units of housing in it. Right now, you can come in here and, God help you, if you want to renovate that thing, John and I both been in it, 48 units is allowed. But if you tear it down, you're down to 23.8. This is back to contradictory zoning bylaws and unintended consequences. They were obviously somewhere back in time trying to incentivize somebody to renovate this building, so they went with a higher unit count if you preserve this nursing home. Well, it doesn't look like any developers or anybody stepped forward in the last 10 plus years. I know it's been vacant. I don't know what's going on. There's some rumors going on now about it, but it just had to read that on a 3-acre site with a sewer connection, infrastructure available. This site could be so much more, but if you take the building down, we're going to clip your ears and take you back to 23.8 units. John and I did a site study. We could get 60 units of housing on this site. 60 units, and get the parking to work.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we were putting 20 pounds in the 5-pound bag. We were talking about partial 2- and 3-story buildings. We're not talking about an 8-story tower. we were able to get it to work on, again, almost 3 acres of site on a lot, and which didn't have any wetland implications on it, so we didn't have anything to deal with there.
I mean, that was actually, as you probably know, a town deal that was a part of, 400 unit development in another location.
It's an offset.
Yeah, it was an offset.
Yeah.
So,
Chapter 40B, I know you've probably heard the terminology in some of the other sessions, you'll probably hear it after this, but we just thought it for a moment to just kind of define the topic again one more time. Chapter 40B is obviously a state statute which enables local zoning boards of appeal to approve affordable housing developments under flexible rules if at least 20 to 25% of the units have long-term affordability restrictions. And we've kind of developed these kind of two columns around here that has led us to friendly 40B world or developer-led 40B world. Right? Town-led friendly 40B is a development which is solicited by the town, where the town provides the location of the development, typically on town-owned land, and resulting most often in a lower land cost or acquisition cost. So it helps to incentivize the developer, nonprofit or otherwise, to come in and do something. So John's going to touch later on about creating inventory, and does your town have a good inventory or not? And then there's the developer-led 40B world. Developments which are proposed by a developer, typically on privately owned land, oftentimes done without any consideration, cooperation, or coordination with the town. And that's under the we sow what we reap what we sow category. So this was one that Rick Brisby and I had the good fortune of working on together probably 8 or 9 years ago now. And I thought it was a good model that the town of Barnstable did. They identified 2 parcels of land. So this is under the town-led proactive model, we'll call it, where the development was solicited by the town. It was 2 town-owned parcels. They kind of somewhat identified what their preferred unit mix was and the housing type they were seeking. And then they selected on a range of selection criteria: design, lease payments. Did they like the site concept? There was a range of criteria that the town was able to use to determine what developer they were going to grant the ground lease to. Housing Assistance Corp was one of the proposers and was selected based on a range of factors, affordability and otherwise. So we ended up being able to develop, and both of these probably could have been bigger projects by a long shot. So I think to some degree the town kind of undercooked them and took the safe, maybe politically expedient route, certainly on the Lombard Farm site, we'll touch on that one. But we were able to develop 28 units, which was the town's, under you're controlling your own destiny. They wanted 28 units of family rental housing across a range of income affordabilities, and they got 28 units through the efforts of Housing Assistance Corp and a range of other investors and low-income housing tax credits and a whole litany of alphabet soup on the financing side.
Are these mixed like 20-25% affordable and the rest market, or are these all affordable?
These had, they were all affordable, Rick, if I correct me, at different levels of affordability. So it was 100% affordable,
Okay.
but at various different levels of the AMI,
Okay.
which I'm sure you've heard that term now. So the AMI was,
So they went-
100.
Okay.
and they went down. But the whole, I don't believe we had any market rates in this development. So this was a site behind the YMCA, right off exit 6 in West Barnstable. Walkable to a little bus stop, walkable to the Y, walkable to the Cape Cod Community College, the commuter lot. It's a great site, had its challenges, really up and down site. The site costs were exorbitant because we had to bring a long access road in, we had to bring long utility runs in. So, developing 28 units, the economy of scale is hard around here when you're held to those kinds of numbers, 12, 28, 14. Costs go through the roof because your economy of scale just isn't there. And on the Cape, we have high site costs. We're not Somerville. We're not Watertown, where we can plug into water, plug into sewer. This site, the Lombard Farm over on 149 off exit 5, I don't know if any of you were here in the 80s, mid to late 80s. I remember there was a big lawsuit. I think it was the Barnstable Housing Authority was trying to develop 50-something housing units on that, and there were lawsuits flying all over. I was here at the time. And it sat, and nothing got done, and 25 years later, the town finally identified, a whopping 12 units of over 55 housing. Now, there's no town water there, there's other criteria that we're putting pressures on that site. But 7.5 acres, some of it was protected and environmentally restricted, but the density count was pretty low. It could have been higher.
Is it rental or sale?
That's rental. Yeah. And then, of course, we have our favorite model that everyone loves to talk about around here is the West Control model, the developer-led 40B reactive model. Developments which are proposed by a developer typically on private land. Often it's the developer-led priorities with minimal town coordination or cooperation, right? I don't know if you've been seeing this, of course, in the paper, the Liberty Green. It was going to be a hotel. Cape Cod Commission turned it down for a litany of reasons. The developer said, okay, well, here's what you're going to get then. I'm going to give you 104 units of housing on a 2.4 acre site, right on virtually right on Main Street. So, you know, is this what you want? So it's about reinforcing that message. You control your destiny as policymakers, as boards, as town officials. Can you incentivize others in your community to take a look at some of these things that we are inheriting and we have no pushback for right now, other than the litigation side of things? Town-led housing bylaws. Town of Dennis years ago identified, had a town parcel, and they crafted a bylaw for affordable housing such that this particular development was allowed as of right. It required a special permit from the planning board, but essentially the criteria were broad enough that 27 units of family rental were able to be developed on this former kind of agricultural site. And the idea is in their RFP, they specifically said, we want scattered site housing, we want it to maintain the rural character of the site, we want to see various levels of affordability. So the criteria were fairly well established. Again, Housing Assistance Corp proposed this development and was selected over a couple that came in with kind of, we're going to put a single building right here, and we're going to ignore some of the things in your RFP, and this is what we're going to submit. And they didn't get selected. So this project was 27 units on 6.4 acres. It's essentially a ground lease with the town of Dennis. And I think they did a really good job of crafting this affordable housing bylaw. I think it was a good model. I don't know how across the town it goes, but at least for this localized site, they controlled their destiny, they identified the site, they crafted a bylaw around it, and then they developed a developer RFP.
There are a lot of units that are built using chapter 4.9.
Good. That's good to hear, because this is the only one that I've heard. I'm by no means an attorney in the zoning world, so I'm only going to skip through terminology relatively quick here, and then I think we're getting close to our break point. So other zoning options and tools. There's conventional zoning, there's planned unit developments. Around here, we think of planned unit developments mostly as subdivisions, where it might say 2 acres of zoning, but the developer comes in with a whole bunch of half-acre lots, and the remainder is put over into open space. So the way this boils down is around here, more of a subdivision planned unit development. But in its broader context, in its broader definition, it's basically an intent to encourage more options on site design and use, reduce the cost of infrastructure by bringing things more closely together, promote efficient land use, protect open space and environmental considerations. So it's a way of intentionally kind of reining in the development area and using the outlying areas as they should, as in natural open space, etc. So planned unit developments is something that is not used very often up here. Contract zoning. Our growth incentive zones in Barnstable is a form of contract zoning. Essentially, it allows authorities to negotiate with developers. There are a set of restrictions that are agreed to in exchange for a modification of the existing regulations. So you've probably well heard now that parts of downtown Hyannis are now a growth incentive zone as an overlay. It allows the developer to bypass the Cape Cod Commission and it stays as local control. It allows the developer to engage in a more direct discussion and design process with the town. And what comes out of it is a regulatory agreement that's adopted by the town council and onward they go. But by and large, it bypasses the zoning board of appeals.
Do growth incentive zones have to be accepted at town meeting?
That's a
Or
great
are they
question.
policy
I'm not sure.
decisions?
I'm not sure. I know it's adopted, it's proposed, and the Cape Cod Commission they end up working together on this. I know in Barnstable, they worked hand in glove with the Cape Cod Commission to develop the zone. I believe in Barnstable, we don't have town meeting, we have the town council. They have to adopt, I believe they have to adopt the overlay zone itself. So again, it went all the way up the food chain to the town council as the final decision maker.
And Susan, if you jot that down, we'll get an answer for you on that.
Okay.
Incentive zoning incentives are offered to developers in exchange for specific community benefits. Those can be open space, they can be parks, they can be affordable housing. We don't see this too often around here as an incentivized zoning approach where there's an active negotiation with developers to inform outcomes. Performance zoning, I'm not going to touch on that too much. It does not regulate the use of a parcel, but rather the impact of a proposal on its surrounding area. It's a little bit ambiguous, and what that really boils down to is it's less quantitative and it's more qualitative, where developments are reviewed kind of in their own, I don't want to say in a bubble, but for that site, is that development an appropriate use? And are there other protective measures that are going on around it? So it's a form of contract zoning where you're back and forth a little bit more performance-based and less quantitative, as we find with most of our bylaws. Right now, if you look at any bylaw, you can't do this, you can do this, you can't do that, can't do that, can't do this. It's mostly the math and about what you can't do. Form-based codes is starting to get some attention around here. I was talking to Heather Harper the other day, and I don't know if Heather's session's gone by or.
She had one session, she'll have another one.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where she's going to touch on it, so I don't want to steal her thunder on form-based codes. But form-based codes, essentially, at its essence, is it focuses, again, less on land use of the property and more on the physical design of structures and spaces. You'll see bylaws that are much more graphic. You know, buildings shall be this high, we want datums this big, we want massing of this type, we want parking in the back. You'll see much more of a graphic approach to zoning than the words and text and math. So again, it's literally taking and utilizing.
But use is
Physical
still
form.
prescribed by
Use-
something else,
use
so it
is-
wouldn't be an arbor spot.
No.
Or a house.
Use is absolutely still
Okay.
rolled into form-based thinking, but it's how do you take that use and transform it onto the site? So it uses the physical form rather than separation of uses as the organizing principle. Real quick, I think we got about just 2 minutes, Laura, before we
No, I
break.
think you're okay,
Okay.
because we're going to do the break.
Okay, so this is a site in Yarmouth, and I just wanted to put it out there for people to kind of think about. It's a 4.34 acre lot. I actually know it pretty well because our office is actually right in this building here, so I can walk it, and I have walked it. There's actually some nice trails through here, the town of Yarmouth conservation areas. So this is exit 7 Willow Street here, heading north towards 6A. The Cape Highway is right about there. So it's only a couple of buildings in on the right is Summer Street, kind of a bit of a tin can alley back here at Corporation Road. There's a small office building here. There's several office buildings that have developed here. It's B3 business zoning, easy access to Route 6. There is no sewer available. There are significant utility easements, primary Eversource lines, slice right through that whole section there. Low NIMBY factor, there's not a lot of neighbors around it. So we've got conservation areas, town of Yarmouth, all of this is protected area, so it's relatively low on the NIMBY scale, lots of conservation areas. So the rhetorical question is, could this site support housing? I think it could. I looked at it, it's for sale, I kind of looked at it for a potential client, and I thought, geez, you gotta look at this one carefully. So here it is on the general zoning map. Kind of a defined B3 zone. This is the northern part of the town, mostly the 6A area, with a couple of pockets of business sprinkled in on 6A. But, you know, by and large, we're looking at all the kind of R30, R40 districts in the town of Yarmouth up in this map. So now I'm going to pick on Yarmouth. Sorry, Mary. So here's the town of Yarmouth. Here's my favorite zoning table of all. I call it the column of no's. Everything you can't do in this zone. So you look at residential uses here, single family, two family, multifamily, all the way down through all the different residential uses, and I highlighted multifamily. And you go to the B3 column, and it's no, 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 no. Board of Appeals for a lodging house, no, 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 no. So that's just kind of indicative of what we say when we say zoning is at cross purposes often with the need and desire for housing.
Right.
It's just, there's no two ways about it. This is probably one of the best examples I can show. So right now, the town in Yarmouth is making overtures and efforts to identify housing appropriate areas. But north of 6A, north of Route 6, north of the Mid-Cape Highway, we only have our 40 B3 and B1 districts. Guess what? No multi-unit housing allowed north of the highway.
Because it's the Kings Highway Commission as well.
No, I think that's only a very small part of it. Somewhere back in time, and I don't know, I'm gathering maybe it was in the 80s, when development was, it was the Wild West down here. Somewhere it got put into town meeting and adopted, right? So it didn't get just slipped in by somebody. Somebody petitioned and it went to town meeting and they decided, we're drawing a literal line in the sand, no multi-unit housing north of the Mid-Cape Highway.
And Rick,
So-
I think you have time, if you wanted to get some discussion on that lot.
Okay, good,
Um,
great. So we're moving.
What are they asking for?
I think it was 900,000.
What was it?
I think it was 900,000. It's been on the market for a while though. So I guess the rhetorical question here is what could this site be? We said ideas, discussion. So if you were kind of in our shoes and you were asked to kind of come in and look at the site, or you were a developer, what could you see on this site? What would make sense in this location? And I'm sure every one of you can generally think about that site in your town. Doesn't have to be this exact site, but everyone's got a site in town they've identified, and they can think about it this way. So what kind of housing could this be? What kind of housing should it be?
The other question is how many of these lots exist elsewhere? And one of the things we'll talk about later on is an inventory of available lots that may fall between the cracks. So as Rick can talk to this as well, looking at development, there's not a lot of undeveloped land available for housing, but there may be these type of little nuggets sprinkled around the various areas. So it's not only, can you, but what else might be available that may be getting filtered out perhaps because of the way the current zoning regulations are set up. So, we'd be certainly advocating for looking at the inventories of availability of lots for this type of development.
I think it would be interesting to hear from people if they think that this is a good site for housing. We can do a little yes and no here and see where people stand on it. Maybe Mary wants to weigh in.
Well, I think that didn't Sid have a chapter 40B proposal in this area? And I think it's where the cul-de-sac is. So it's over more.
Further north. Is that the one off Summer Street? I mean, down here there's a cul-de-sac.
Side North, is that what it's called?
There's a small cul-de-sac right up here, but beyond the pond, there's a small cul-de-sac up in here.
But it's all in B3.
It's all B3? Yeah, so,
So there was a chapter 40B proposal in this area, and the town denied it. And it went to the Housing Appeals Committee, and it's one of two that never made it through the Housing Appeals Committee. Because it was, I think, 80 rental units surrounded by developed industrial use. And ucky industrial use, like people hauling, waste, recycling, a boatyard where there's lots of sanding and stuff like that. So I think for this site, I think our first question would be, what are the other uses around it? Because it's in industrial zone.
it is, it's B3 zone, so it's not industrial. There's industrial uses as you come down Corporation Road, and as I said, there's a bit of a tinge down, but it's also not a massive area.
It's a dirt road too.
And if this is dirt, this becomes a dirt road right in here,
Right.
right? So you don't have a lot of through traffic. You
And
have
that's a lovely building.
the IPOD building right here, you have a small office building right here, and you have empty space.
I'd say senior housing.
It's my impression was,
They're right here.
it's a bit isolated. although the transportation certainly is good for people, because you're right off the highway.
Isolated in what way?
Because it is all business, it's not neighborhoods around, so, I mean, that's one of the concerns, is that when you do the affordable stuff, are you isolating people from, rather than integrating?
Later on, you're gonna see an image of a pocket neighborhood, so also think about it is, we're talking about urban kind of downtown village settings, but can there be pocket neighborhoods that are intentional developments, albeit a bit isolated?
Yeah, no, that's what you could do, something like the ones you just showed before, the half did or Melvin Farms,
Yeah.
that gives it a village feel. You have to do.
Kind of internalize
that.
Yeah.
One of the good parts about it, and what I was gonna say, where I grew up in Dorchester, there's opportunities when there's, urban renewal type of situations, when there's a problem, it creates an opportunity. And so, one of the things that we were talking about in Yarmouth is, there's no land to do something. So we have the political capital now. We sold the Village Center overlay district. That won. Well, you made all the same arguments about working in the same place, having housing with you kind of have a Mashpee Commons type of situation. Well, one of the big problems is we have no place to put it. Well, there's a place to put it. And you've made all the arguments in the previous overlay district, so you've gone through it. So the town can say, oh, I see, this is what we did here. And the truth of the matter is the overlay, the Village Center, which you outlined, where that stuff is allowed, hasn't really happened yet. Some of it's coming through, what'd you say, Mary?
Yeah, so we have the motel bylaw that allows for multifamily too, and we have 2 active sites that are getting but it doesn't apply, you're right, to anything in here.
What I'm saying is, all that takes is the incentive and the motivation to sell it. And we went to town meeting, it was sold, and if it's a good idea, there's nothing like a good idea.
And my comments about spot zoning, well, don't take them as entirely negative, because there can be an application where spot zoning might create a real benefit. Could that be and I'm not saying this site in particular, but could you identify a site and spot zone it and incentivize somebody? So kind of leading a developer, a nonprofit or otherwise, to the table by virtue of, a very strategic and targeted rezoning effort. So,
Maybe an SRO
sure.
for younger people with a community
I'd love to have
kitchen.
what about some housing for young professionals in here where they could walk to some of these office buildings? I'd love to get a couple of young people in my office, but of course, big issue is
Right.
where are they going to live? Where are they going to rent? So maybe you'll see an image later on we call kind of millennial village, a term we made up, but the term you'll start hearing more and more as the millennial generation starts to impose their will on the kinds of housing they want to see. We'll get to that in the second part here. How are we doing, Laura, for time?
No, I think we're good, we can move on.
Okay, I think we're going to start to wrap up this first section. Current housing types, everyone knows the most common, which is this slide, single-family condominiums. Every one of these is a project or a site on Cape Cod, so this is what we have. We know all of the typical multi-unit, 2-family, mobile home parks, some limited special needs, things that are starting to get woven in, and elder care facilities. But what new housing types might we start needing to think about as demographics change? Why do we need to think differently? Well, obviously the big one, which I'm sure you've all seen some of these statistics, is changing demographics. And average household size is driving down and driving down fast. 4.2 back in 1920, 2010, we're at 2.5. I believe if you looked at the Cape, that number is probably lower. I think we know intuitively we've got a lot of single or 1.5 household sizes. So we've got smaller and smaller household sizes, but yet our housing isn't really relating to that need. We have the affordability gap. I know you've seen this or will see it in another session. This is from the Cape Cod Young Professionals Shape the Cape. Median household income, $63,000 and change. Median home price, $370,000. So I just posed the question, oh really, what towns and where? How much inventory? Where are those towns and how many of those houses or
How awful are they?
and how awful a condition are they in, right? So we all know that there's a big gap between affordability and the market rate prices of homes around here. Aging in place and downsizing, that's not gonna change. Baby boomers at and continuing to retire over the next 15 to 20 years. Millennial generation, I've got two of them, 2 out of 3, they're clearly right there. School debt, the highest amount of school debt ever is what this generation is coming out with. But they have a desire to live greener, and they have a desire for a smaller footprint. Transient workforce housing and seasonal, how are we handling that? We're doing a project on Nantucket right now, I never would have thought we were doing. It's 15, essentially 15 bedrooms, modular housing for the Maya Comet Golf Course for Filipino groundskeepers, ground workers. I mean, there's Maya Comet out there in the middle of the ocean, and they can't get anybody to come work at their golf course, so they're doing the import. They're getting seasonal workers. They have nowhere to live, so they're building a modular dormitory for that specific need. I just thought it was kind of interesting. It kind of came out of nowhere.
It's on land bank then, too.
It's on land bank land, yeah. There's clearly a growing desire for walkable communities. We've touched on that in some of the slides. There's clearly a desire to go back to less suburban sprawl and neighborhood walking and more downtown walking and more access to amenities, stores, restaurants, other things, amenities that are available. So there's that in Boston, I know, is going crazy right now because you've got competing older people who are retiring and wanting to go back to the cities, and younger people who are trying to stake their flag and be in the city. So I've talked to a developer up there recently, and he said there's major pressure on both ends of the spectrum, driving the prices to astronomical numbers because you've got both of these bookends kind of desiring, in a sense, the same thing. Growing demand for veterans housing. With wars come veterans, injured veterans. Special needs as we go on and as certain conditions are defined, like autism and the autistic spectrum. We're working with John on a project in Orleans that is housing for autistic adults. It's an intentional community for 16 autistic adults. Again, 10 to 15 years ago, you wouldn't even have heard of such a thing. But there's a desire to put a small housing community right in the center of Orleans, and to their credit, they've welcomed it. Did you have a question?
I guess the one thing that keeps striking me that I don't know if it's never going to get fixed, but Cape has a unique situation where so many homes are either investment homes or secondary homes. I don't know the percentage of how many of those are single homes, but I would think that it would be a lot. And I'm always wondering how come, and this was brought up by somebody before, is how can we perhaps give them an incentive to have their own little communities where they can come and go and they're not taking up the single homes and everybody else's. That's something that seems to be there but not there.
Right. I think the fundamental flaw in that thinking is people want their house, they want to be able to use it when they want to use it.
Yeah, well,
right?
no, not only that, but I mean,
Yeah.
take it from the single homes, maybe give them their own different kind of housing where they can do the same thing, but they're not taking up all the single homes.
Right. Interesting thought. And of course, very low local inventory. So that's one of the other problems that we're certainly wrestling with is the inventory to keep up with demand and a changing demand. Obviously, the Cape, we're all here because we love it here, and it's a desirable place to be, but the population is not going down. There may be some exodus of families, and there's certainly some dipping of younger kids by virtue of the real estate market. I don't think that's any secret, and I'm not saying anything new there. You're seeing towns that had a big influx of younger people and younger students and younger families, and then all of a sudden we're starting to see things coming down the other side of that demographic. Micro apartments. So some of the new things that we're starting to hear, right? They call it micro apartments. We used to call them studio apartments, right? It's basically the same thing. It's a small apartment. It's an SRO. It's a single resident occupancy. 1 or 1.5 or 2 people, right? So 350 to 500 square foot apartments. Housing over the shop, retail level with housing over the top. Falmouth, this is Main Street Falmouth, that Bob Murray's group was instrumental in developing years ago, with had housing over kind of intentional retail and office space right on Main Street. This is another view of Falmouth here. This is obviously an older building, and yet there's clearly some residential units over that retail level. So again, we're not talking about, some of these are not new types. We're just trying to reintroduce some of these types. Workforce housing, just a sketch concept of 60 units on 2.4 acres, so pretty high density. It's just a kind of a concept of, well, how, when you talk about compactness and density and intentional neighborhoods, that's 60 units of workforce housing at 2.5 acres of land. Still with green space woven in, little community building, parking woven throughout, very efficient circulation, buildings close to each other with little slots of green space in between. It doesn't, so this is again just a graphic to kind of talk about workforce housing and the density that may be needed to respond to that need. Special needs community, this is Cape Cod Village in Orleans that I was just speaking about that has essentially 4 homes, 1, 2, 3, 4. The state in its infinite wisdom makes us connect them and make it a duplex. Don't know why, but that's some Department of Developmental Services regulation that they can't seem to look beyond. So we did the fabulous fake. We connected with a screen porch. And we passed the kind of a litmus test of a duplex. So we have basically a house and a house connected with a shared screen porch in the middle. We call it our umbilical cord to beat the state. And then we have a community resource center here that will be providing autistic education for autism. And the idea is to kind of provide a central gathering spot for lots of programming. This is Dennis. We were not involved in this, but they are working hard, of course, to try to develop some veteran housing, having some difficulties along the way, but to their credit, they recognize the need and they're trying to fill it. Compact cottage neighborhoods, you won't see this a lot in the zoning bylaws, right? Buildings this close, right? The back to cottages of Martha's Vineyard or Oak Bluffs or anywhere you recognize tight, compact forms. And this is actually an award-winning project out in Seattle. I just love the image of these cottages around the shared green space. And behind these is the driveway and the kind of service side of the house. So you kind of come at it from the back side, and you kind of have this shared green space. And you got a tight-knit little community there. I'm not going to get into the social aspects of building that close to your neighbor, but micro-millennial villages. So kind of a local, a current buzzword, millennial villages, is what types of housing are we starting to see out there in the world that responds to younger people coming out of school and needing an affordable apartment. And sometimes they're not looking to jump into the marketplace as single-family homeowners as early as some of us wanted to. Again, back to student debt. I know you heard about that in another session. With high student debt means you're deferring a mortgage probably longer than ever. So where are you living in the meantime? What kinds of good, affordable rental housing is going to be available for the millennial generation? Tiny homes. I can't stand the show, but I like the concept. It's probably here to stay. I don't know. It'll be an interesting kind of thing to watch. Can people really live comfortably in a house of 300 square feet, 400 square feet or smaller? I don't know. My wife and I would kill each other in that thing. No question about it. Accessory units. That clearly is an area where the Cape is gaining some good traction. I know Falmouth just passed the bylaw. Cape Cod Commission developed an interesting model bylaw that's being circulated around various towns. It's kind of started with the in-law apartment terminology that we grew up with. Now accessory units, whether they're detached or attached structures, or they're legal basement apartments, legal in the sense of proper light, ventilation, and egress. Doesn't have all those qualities, or are they illegal apartments and basements? And we know there's lots of illegal apartments around here. There's a whole industry around that. But I think the idea is to get them literally above ground and get them out in the open and get them counting towards your inventory for affordable housing in your town and provide it for a single person or a young couple starting out, right? Think of how many different applications an accessory apartment, not to mention the income that might help. So, right, maybe there's a senior single woman who wants to get additional income, lives in the house by herself and rents out the cottage in back or the room over the garage to a young couple starting out. I think that's what the accessory bylaw is meant to do, and a gap is meant to fill. So that's just a summary of the accessory apartment bylaw. April 2017, Falmouth approved it. Homeowners can create an accessory dwelling, can't exceed 800 square feet or 40% of the floor area of the main structure. Apartments cannot exceed 2 bedrooms. requires that the property owner live on the property for at least 7 months of the year. Rental periods cannot be less than 6 months. So obviously it's a desire to not have it as a transient unit or a weekly seasonal rental. It's intended to be a little bit longer term rental situation. And it's geared towards prohibiting those weekly and monthly summer rentals.
Tried to take a very proactive approach. Talked about growth incentive zones. We just had ours extended for another 4 years through the Cape Cod Commission. Does not require annual town meeting approval. It's just Cape Cod Commission. That helps us a lot in securing economic incentives for various developers should they be looking in Yarmouth. We have a village center overlay district for 4 districts in town, 4 here.
Yes.
PCODs in town along 28. So we've lined up to lay out a plan for developers should they want to do something a little bit different, where there's a lot more flexibility. And there's a lot of flexibility in the growth incentive zones because you don't require Cape Cod Commission approval.
So Yarmouth's trying to be very proactive
Well, we're
there.
trying to, I
Yes,
will tell you,
yes.
what's the biggest problem is trying to incentivize developers to come in. Planning and zoning is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that at every public meeting I've ever gone to, every class I've ever gone to, every instructional I've ever gone to, says zoning is the bad girl. And in some ways, I agree with them. There are requirements that we make developers go through hoops. But the very first slide I thought was informative to me. What is zoning? Why do we have it? We have it to protect people's rights, for privacy, to make sure the air is good, the soil is good, we protect our water. That overlay that you did on that particular piece of property that started out like this, and then wound up like this, wound up like that for not so many bad reasons. Yes, we should protect an overlay, an aquifer protective overlay zone. We should do that. So part of it is trying to work with developers. That is our key thing now. It's not trying to change zoning. We've done a lot in that area. It's trying to work with developers, our Chamber of Commerce, to get people to look at development a little differently and help them wherever we can, particularly with housing.
And you're absolutely right, we have a lot of issues on the Cape protecting our environment, protecting our community character. I think I'm going to turn it back over here because I think we need to move on with the presentation, but thank you all for that exercise.
I was involved in identifying an appropriate site for housing. So just from the clinical part of it, when we are consulted with to look at a site, if it's often starts off as on a feasibility level, what can be done on this site? A developer or a housing authority will come and say, well, we want to do, fill in the blanks and maximize the development potential, what are the restrictions and so forth. And that previous image that we were talking about sort of showed you how you start with a raw piece of land and then you start subtracting off of that, your various zoning setbacks and wetland setbacks and so forth, and then how much really buildable land do you have available. Then you superimpose on top of that, you've got to do a wastewater calculation, so it's a lot of kind of going back and forth, and quite a bit of time involved. Back in the office, running the calculations on that. So, we could do, some kind of back of the envelope calculation, but you still have to be able to equate how big the lot is, how many units can you fit in. If it's not hooked up to a sewer system, which most of them aren't, then, how much space do you need for your sewage disposal system? That's going to require a certain amount of area. And then that sewage disposal system has setbacks as well. And then if you're in a groundwater protected zone, there's nitrogen loading restrictions. And so there's just, you kind of go through the whole checklist. So some things that, we would go through is kind of usual culprits. You always have to look at the infrastructure, access to water, roadways, utilities, sewage capacity, and any immediate natural resources, wildlife habitat areas, any overlays. If you're in a flood zone, there's a whole litany of other requirements and restrictions on that. Certainly with wetlands, as we talked about earlier. Then you've got the innate site challenges. What's the topography look like? What are the soil conditions? Are you close to groundwater? Any other municipal water sources? If you're close to a groundwater protected district. And then you start whittling down till you get back to now what can the site support? Is there an economy of scale? We talked earlier about the economy of scale. Because of the infrastructure needs, there's a certain fixed cost you have to incur on developing a site. So roads, access, drainage, sewage disposal, water service, utilities, all that has, dollar signs to them. And, the smaller the number of units, it's hard to spread that cost out over a smaller number of units. So until you get into some of the larger developments where those unit costs can come down per unit, are going to be part of scalability. So, there's an economy of scale to it. Do the numbers make sense? Again, whether it's a housing authority or it's a private developer, they've got to run through a pro forma to look at the site, the analysis of the development costs, how much can they get on the back side of it. So when you start whittling away with it, just like you did on the site, you also look at the financial piece of it. You start whittling away at it, and there's a very tight margin that any development can really take in terms of whether or not the numbers make sense for the project or not. Of course, there's traffic, circulation, both internal and external. Who has the site control? Is it town-owned property? Is it a private development on town-owned property? There's other political considerations. We talked about the NIMBY factor earlier, kind of water perceptions and the impacts on the adjacent neighborhoods. But one of the things that maybe if there could be a takeaway that we get back to later on when we get to the closing is to be thinking about this piece of it, the importance of the feasibility study. And I think someone mentioned earlier about if you're in the housing authority and you've got some land that you want to put out an RFP for a developer, being on the other side of the fence, a lot of times the developers, these are the housing authorities, or the developers will come to us and say, well, this RFP, we'd like to do this. What do you think? And then we roll up our sleeves and, you don't even have a contract yet. And, you've got to run through, there's a lot of work here to get to that point. And, it could be a pig in the poke for the developer, whether or not that makes any sense to them before they can put it. Because now they've got to go through their whole pro forma analysis, and they want to know from us how many units, how many cost, how much does it cost to put a septic system in, and yada, yada, yada. So we go through that whole process. So one of the things that we would both recognize when we talked about this would recommend to any of the folks representing the housing authorities here is that you might want to maybe contract to do a feasibility study prior to putting out an RFP. So the more information you can give to the developer prior to, the better it's going to be. And that could be just an existing condition survey, a site analysis, what's the septic capacity, what are the utility capacities, what's the maximum density. And the other thing that we would say would be make it more goal-oriented or objective-based. Because we want to maximize the site development to whatever the extents are for affordable housing or so forth. So you allow more creativity, number one, on the part of the developer who's looking to do the housing project to come up with various solutions. There you go. Yeah, okay, so good point. So there it is. We already found that. I think we may have rehearsed this once or twice. So what does a good RFP look like? Broad goals and objectives, has flexibility to maneuver with design, unit count, unit mix, thoughtful selection criteria, perhaps already have a site survey completed. The town has completed some of the upfront due diligence relative to geotechnical, septic analysis, water, utilities, feasibility, and so forth. You may have some incentives, involved in the RFP. Also provide maybe at least take it through or have access to amenities and infrastructure. And the main point, the more information the town has, the more likely the developer will be interested in working with the town, and the more competitive that bid's going to be. Now, someone mentioned earlier, sometimes people don't even want to look at a project. And I don't know if you wanted to mention one of our lower Cape towns that put out an RFP which was so restrictive that they put out and nobody responded to it. So I mean, you folks who are in that world recognize that. But I believe there's a future session, Laura, that you said that.
Yes, yeah, they're going to go into RFPs in depth.
So we're kind of, looks like we only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through the next slide, a couple slides in about 5 minutes. But what we thought we'd end with is kind of a case study. So this is 201 Main Street in Hyannis. The town is called it a gateway site. I have to laugh because it's one of the most decrepit sites you can find. And right to the left is a sign that says, "Welcome to downtown Hyannis." And this is what you see. It's really pretty tough. And we thought if we're going to pick a site to kind of do a little study on, let's make it a fun one. So I've been driving by this one for years and going, what a train wreck. This should be something. Well, what could it be, right? So every Cape Cod town has a Cascade motor launch. Right? You can just close your eyes and think of your town and pick 2 or 3 properties that you wish would be redeveloped, right? So just quickly, it's kind of an L-shaped parcel. You come down, right here is Yarmouth Road, Town of Barnstable's annex buildings right here. And there's the sign that I was referring to. You got an abandoned pool, you got a parking lot, what was probably a nice historic building at one time, and your kind of quintessential 50s strip motel. Relatively good sized parcel. It's 2.1 acres, I believe. No, I'm sorry, 1.75. So this is the site. We just pulled this from the town GIS to do our own little back of the napkin study. This is not anybody commissioning us to do anything. We just said, let's pick a site. 1.75 acres, motel use. There's no definition along the street. There's some actual nice buildings right down through here. You get towards Bradford Hardware. It's like, relatively high, close to the street, kind of interesting streetscape stuff. But then it's broken right here at this fairly large section, all the way to the corner. It's the parking lot. And yet it goes very deep. Again, referred to as a gateway site. And I think, so here's the existing property. We just did a quick little SketchUp model of the site here. As the existing buildings that are on the property now, so you can kind of see the undeveloped parcel. Let's take it all away. Which is the boom moment. It's all gone. You got a clean slate. What could it be? So, could it be a pocket neighborhood? Could it be some small-scale, interesting kinds of structures that are woven in with green space and perhaps parking slips in the back, and maybe you have some of your drainage and parking up in the back here. We know there's a sewer, so there's probably not going to be a big footprint for a leaching field. So could it be a series of small, clustered, kind of, call them individual homes, multifamily? It doesn't really matter. This is more just to kind of convey a lot with a form and a shape on it. Could that be a pocket neighborhood? How about an interior pedestrian street? We have an image of a Newburyport that kind of showed a kind of interesting pedestrian street. Vehicles weren't allowed. Could this be a case where we start to infill from the existing block and we continue it down and we start to infill it with buildings and intentional green spaces, fully recognizing we have to have cars and parking and all the other infrastructure getting to the site. So this is kind of the street, beginning of talking about street edge, bringing buildings towards the front, zero lot line clearance. The courtyard concept, where again, just kind of a variation on a theme here, where we're making some intentional courtyards on the street edge, but using buildings as well to define those kinds of spaces along the road. And then we have the street edge infill. This is kind of taking and finishing the block, if you will. And think about that as maybe that's retail on the ground level with housing above it. And again, with parking here, you've got a large municipal parking lot across the street. So could that be a 2 or 3 story urban infill that extends the road and creates a compactness and brings back retail, extension of the retail with housing above it? I think it could. Or we could leave it to the developer. Let them come in, put a building on it, solve the parking problem, and on they go, and they've got their return on investment, right? So it's about, back to the theme of we reap what we sow. What do we want? You control your own destiny. You're the decision makers, not us. You're in the power positions to make the changes. So do we want this, or do we want other things? So the conclusion, we're going to wrap up now, and then we'll have a few minutes for Laura to take us through our takeaways today. Our kind of theme, as you've well heard today, zoning is broken. You create your own destiny. What is your vision for the ideal community? We have great village centers, both on and off Cape, to serve as precedent. Towns can lead the process and impact the outcome. How Housing types are expanding in response to demand and changing needs. Site feasibility studies are important for town-owned parcels which are earmarked for housing. What is your available inventory of parcels for housing? And I think John had a couple of takeaways that aren't on here that he wanted to kind of leave you with. I'm going to stop right there.
Yeah, so we briefly brought up a number of them during the process, but essentially, looking at on the incentive side of things, when we put so many restrictions on any side, I'm not saying getting rid of the regulations, it's working with orders, but also understanding an outcome-based regulatory environment. So, go back and look at it. I'm not saying go back and rewrite all your zoning regulations, but really look at them and see where there's spaces maybe where they need to be tweaked a bit more. We talk about the inventory of available lots. And I know a lot of towns do have some inventories, but they're nuggets. I mean, it was pointed out today, just one example. I'm sure there's others there. I think redevelopment is really the key. I mean, the facts of the matter is there's only so many vacant lots available now. But looking at the redevelopment side of things, and one of the things that Rick and I talked about is on the regulatory side of things, having sensible regulations to encourage the smart development. And what we thought about was sort of the same way we have to go through an analysis on an existing structure for a code review. And the building code is very systematic in the approach. They actually have a whole section relative to existing buildings. And then you actually develop certain classifications that trigger quote-unquote code upgrades. Oftentimes what happens is it becomes a disincentive for someone to do anything with a property, kind of the example that Rick had showed with the nursing home. Because it becomes kind of restrictive to what can be done. And the way that the building code is set up is that, essentially what triggers it is any additional alteration or change in use in the existing structure. And then that's broken down into different levels, depending on how much change that you're doing and how big is the alteration, and how does that impact. What's the existing conditions? Number one, you have to do a thorough existing conditions evaluation of the existing structure, look at all life safety requirements, structural capabilities, and so forth, and then look at what are the impacts the proposed change in the use or the alteration has to do on the existing structure. It depends on the threshold of how great that impact is. So we were thinking, looking at the same sort of thing from a site development point of view, if you were looking at whatever your trigger points were. So for instance, an increase in sewage flow. So if you've got a site that already has an existing septic system on it, and even if you're changing the use, but you're not increasing the flow, now you have to go back and completely upgrade to current code, as long as it meets whatever the minimum standard was at the time that it was in, and assuming it's a post-1995 system that was in place. So these have huge ramifications. As long as the system is operational and working and so forth, you need to go out there and do these code upgrades. Increase in traffic, any increase in parking, I mean, obviously those things will trigger reviews as well, but what is the intensity of whatever those changes are? Increase in the pervious areas and so forth. So having a threshold level would be a reasonable approach. Again, from the development side of things, when someone's looking at a property, we have an example, and I see Ally back there, from our Cape Health Services in Harwich. It's an existing building. It was a grocery store. It got purchased by another entity, turned into a business office, and now our Cape Health Services wants to move there to create medical offices. So they're staying within the existing building, but you still got to go through a whole litany of code reviews and so forth. So at which point do these things trigger? And question by the Board of Health. Well, if it exceeds a certain amount of flow, then you have to go through and do an environmental review. Does it meet current requirements? And we understand you have to go through that whole process to make sure if there's any deficiencies that they're corrected and so forth. But are you going to take that and put it under the same level of scrutiny as you would from a new development? From the let's say tenant's point of view, well, there's an existing building. We just want to fix it up, do some handicap accessibility and other fixings to the buildings, and essentially be able to move right back into it. So those are the kind of things I think as you're looking at the developments, perhaps there's some sort of a little more reasonable level of threshold or trigger points.
And I was just going to ask the audience, someone who hasn't spoken, a takeaway from this session. Anyone with a takeaway of what you learned today about zoning and site selection? Someone in the back of the room? Anyone? Joe?
Well, the feasibility study for, especially as a housing authority member, I came up, I don't know how I got it, but I came up with a great idea of an area up in Summer and Willow Street up there that might be a great site to have feasibility like that.
We're gonna go put an option on that, watch out.
A takeaway, anyone else? Takeaway from the back of the room there? Jill?
The importance of making sure that our zoning matches to promote what appeals to us in our town,
Yeah, very
and that
good.
they're compatible.
Yeah, very good. So just, if we can all give a nice round of applause.